If you're shocked that I'm covering a Star Trek game in Nickelodeon video game history, well, it's time that you learn about corporate synergy. Nickelodeon's parent company Paramount are the owners of Star Trek. When Paramount started a huge push for the franchise back in 2017, one of the demographics they really wanted to target was kids. Since then, and with the launch of Paramount Plus, we've seen a glut of Star Trek shows including Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and Strange New Worlds, but all of those are pretty much aimed at an older crowd. To give kids a gateway into the franchise, they created Star Trek Prodigy, which would be partially developed by Nickelodeon and debut on Paramount Plus, before eventually coming to the network. They weren't skimping on this show either. Notable talent like Jason Mantzoukas and D. Bradley Baker made up the cast, while Star Trek royalty Kate Mulgrew returned to reprise the role of Captain Janeway. The show initially received a 2-season order, which has been slowly rolling out. The first 10 episodes of Season 1 aired between October of 2021 and February of 2022, with the second half starting to air around about the time this video will go live. And it's one of the rare times I've come to a game in Nickelodeon video game history and have just been completely clueless about the show. I've never been a Star Trek fan, so I thought I better do my due diligence and check it out prior to my review. Basically, the premise of Prodigy is that it's 2383, 5 years after the Voyager returned to Earth apparently, and a crew of young imprisoned aliens find an abandoned Starfleet ship, the Protostar. They take control of the ship to escape their imprisonment, and they slowly learn to run the Protostar and figure out how to work together as a team. All of this happening while they're being chased by the evil diviner that they escaped from. The show's pretty good in my casual opinion. Visually, it can be quite cinematic at times, but there are always stark drops in quality, to the point that it ends up looking like a PS3 cutscene at times. The fact that Prodigy ends up looking like Tak and the Power of Juju sometimes is slightly distracting, but I think that's just the nature of the beast when doing 3D animation for television. I find the pacing of episodes to be a little iffy at times, with stuff flying by way too quickly, and never really giving the narrative beats a chance to breathe and develop. But overall, it's a decent show. Reminds me a lot of Star Wars Resistance in many ways, which is both a compliment and a criticism. But enough about the show, the game is why we're here. A video game adaptation of the show was announced earlier this year, and on October 14, Star Trek Prodigy Supernova was made available for PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, and PC. And Stadia too, apparently. Can we get a moment of silence for our fallen brother? If you're as passionate about Nickelodeon games as I am, you'll notice that Supernova shares the same release date as Nick Kart Racers 3. Ignoring how idiotic it is to release 2 games on the same day, it does have me feeling nostalgic. Back in the day, Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network would dump out multiple games on the same day or in the same week all the time. It's really bringing me back to the golden era of licensed games. The developers in charge here were Tessera Studios, a small team in Madrid that was founded in 2017. This is just the second game they've ever made, with their debut being Intruders Hide and Seek, a first-person stealth horror VR game. Yeah, it's quite a hard left to go from that to wholesome Nickelodeon content. Will Prodigy hit the right notes? Jump into the USS video game history with me and let's check it out. Star Trek Prodigy is a contender for Cartoon Game of the Year. Going into this with no real affinity for the show, nor the Star Trek franchise at large, I didn't expect to love Supernova as much as I did. It's not the greatest game ever made, and it is very clearly a budget title, but when it hits, it's a pleasure to play. Supernova follows Dal, the leader of the Protostar's ragtag crew, and Gwyn, as they attempt to save their friends and an entire system of planets from a dying star. The story for the game was written by Prodigy staff writer Lisa Boyd, who also did some writing for Black Sails. As a result, the game is filled with a number of references to the show, and it might as well be a canon part of the series. It's set after the mid-season break of the first season and genuinely feels like the characters are developing and changing throughout the game. I wouldn't be surprised if the second half of the season has some very light references to the events of this game. Unfortunately, while the story is solid and has plenty of meat on it for hardcore fans of the show, the presentation of that story is severely lacking. There aren't any proper cutscenes here. Wasn't exactly expecting them considering the game's budget nature, but yeah. To work around this, the story is initially set up with a comic book style cutscene, which is actually done in a rather nice style. Then for the rest of the game, you basically just have the characters' 3D models doing static poses and canned animations over dialogue. But that isn't a problem. The real issue is the voice performances. They got the entire crew back, including Mulgrew, but something went wrong. I don't know if the actors saw that it was a dinky little game and they phoned it in, or if the voice direction they were given was poor, but Supernova really fumbles the bag here. It's probably at its worst in the opening cutscene. The events taking place here are potentially catastrophic for the Protostar crew, but you wouldn't know that by the performances. The acting is super low energy, and combined with the lack of music here, it just feels off and kind of incomplete.
Look out for that planet!
System starting to come back online, but thrusters still not responding. We are entering the planet's atmosphere.
Captain, I recommend you and the crew abandon ship immediately.
And it never gets much better from there. I think the performances do improve slightly for the rest of the game, but not enough. Too often the actors sound like they were recording their lines at 3 AM, trying not to wake up the other people sleeping in their house. It's a shame because there is a lot of plot and story here, but it's made a lot less interesting without great voice performances. Also, it seems like the audio quality of a lot of the lines is just really poor. I don't know, something went seriously wrong here. At least it gave us Dal calling Gwyn mummy.
Hey Gwyn, wa mummy.
You just called me a mummy.
But because of the budget nature of this game, story isn't the big focus here, gameplay is. Thankfully, the devs managed to cook up a surprisingly fun experience. It's a 2-player co-op puzzle action game that can be experienced alone or with another player. You get to be Dal or Gwyn, and if you're playing by yourself, you switch on the fly instantaneously. It's seamless, and it really needs to be due to some of the things the game asks of you. Combat gives each character 2 types of attacks, a ranged attack and a melee attack. Dal leans more heavily towards ranged attacks, being able to use his phases for longer before they overheat compared to Gwyn. This obviously makes Gwyn the melee character, having access to a charged attack to do greater damage. To really emphasize these differences, they never get a more elaborate version of whatever skill they're less proficient in. You'll be able to upgrade the power of your basic ranged or melee attack, but it will never change fundamentally from where it's at in the first minute of the game. As you explore the planet, you'll have new weapons added to your arsenal. Dal gets a rifle and a cannon in addition to his phases, while Gwyn gets a pair of gauntlets and then a spear. Combat starts out feeling really basic, like it's painfully obvious this game was made on a budget. But once the new weapons are added into the mix, it opens up slightly and stops feeling so stiff and robotic. It never becomes a mind-blowing, free-flowing affair, but combat moves smoothly enough that you never feel bogged down by it. The charged attack with Gwyn's gauntlets in particular has a satisfying crunch to it. Adding a little bit more to the combat is the ability to dodge attacks with X. This performs a dash and it's tied to a stamina meter, meaning you have to use it wisely and can't just spam it constantly. It also helps you move over small gaps in the environment, which brings me to the game's movement. This is another aspect where the game feels basic and budget. Movement and the animations associated with movements all just feel so simple. The kind of feedback you'd expect to be getting from making movements and performing certain actions just isn't there in this game. It almost feels like you're playing an unfinished prototype. One of my immediate thoughts when playing Supernova is that it really felt like it captured the same spirit as the Ben 10 beat-em-up games. Something about the gameplay and the way environments were laid out felt so familiar. The big difference here though is that co-op mechanics are found in everything you do, something Ben 10 Power Trip actually did funnily enough, but that game ditched the linear design of the previous beat 'em ups. You've got basic stuff like being able to revive a downed partner in combat, and the puzzles always require an element of teamwork to solve. Get used to moving these power cubes because you'll be doing a lot of it here. I'd say 90% of puzzles feature them in some form, but it's how they integrate Dal and Gwyn's unique abilities with these puzzles that makes the game fun. At the end of the day, you're really only doing the most basic activate the power puzzles, which have existed since the dawn of video games. Dal can lift heavy fallen objects to allow Gwyn to crawl through, and he can sneak past motion detectors safely. Gwyn on the other hand can interrupt lasers that block your path, so Dal can move past safely, or she can create bridges over gaps. Neither character feels more or less useful than the other, which is accurate for both the puzzle abilities and the combat. Neither player is going to feel like they're getting the short end of the stick here or sitting on the sidelines. If you followed me for a while, you know that puzzle-heavy games aren't my jam. It takes a truly special game to snap me out of that mindset. Bizarrely, Supernova is one of those games. It all flows so smoothly, and solving puzzles is supremely satisfying. I think the special sauce really is in the utilization of each character's unique abilities. Gwyn and Dal genuinely feel like a team, even when it's just you and the AI. Probably helps that the teammate AI is almost flawless here as well. That could have broken the game completely if it wasn't so well done. The puzzles never get super hard, and I only got significantly stuck on maybe 1 or 2 of them. The puzzles are far from brain dead though. It hits that sweet spot, and I feel like this would be a great game for a parent and a kid to sit down and tackle together. With the events of the opening cutscenes scattering the crew of the Protostar across several different planets, the cadence of the game sees you retrieving them one by one, and then gaining access to some special abilities. There are 3 planets here, each with 4 levels to explore. Seems a little bare bones at first, but when you discover that some of these levels take over 45 minutes to beat, the game quickly becomes a lot chunkier. In fact, it can actually get a little too long. Some of the longer levels will overstay their welcome just slightly. That's not even to mention the secret locked off sections of levels that you need to return to later, which is where the other characters come in. Found characters serve 2 purposes, the first of which is being able to unlock one specific type of door. For example, Jank and Pog can open these doors. More like Jank and Porg, look at that gigantic dump truck of an ass. Rocktalk will unblock doors closed up with rubble, Murph will slide through doors with tight gaps. The crew of the Protostar love opening doors, almost as much as they love power cubes. The second ability these crewmates have comes in handy during combat. As you dish out more and more hits, a meter will fill, which allows the ability to be activated for a short time. Jankum and Rock deal status effects that increase your damage output and lowers the damage from enemies. Zero can stun enemies in a certain range for a short period, and Murph will do the same, but instead of stunning the enemies in that area, he'll damage them. Each of these abilities is introduced to you via a tutorial, which is massive overkill. You're forced to kill a wave of like 25 enemies each time, which is not really necessary when the abilities are so basic. You could just tell the player what it does and they'd understand it fine, especially because you can't actually control any aspect of the abilities anyway. Even worse was that Rock's tutorial glitched on me and I couldn't progress, forcing me to quit the game entirely and restart it. Once you begin regaining the Protostar's crew members, you get to pick a loadout of sorts for each level, with both characters allowed to pick a crew member for use. The game then takes this mechanic further, offering the player side missions where they can beef up the abilities of these effects. It's nice that the game offers this, but it really didn't interest me. It doesn't feel like the game is deep enough or long enough for me to want to go out of my way and upgrade these, especially because they feel so inconsequential. Speaking of upgrades, there are a few upgrade systems here, although they don't really hit the mark. Defeating enemies or smashing these crystals will give you minerals, which functions as your upgrade currency. You can spend this on upgrading the power of your weapons, your health, and your stamina, but it all feels a bit pointless. When it comes to weapons, the game only allows you to upgrade these when it says you can. Rather than forcing the player to just save up enough minerals, the game locks it all behind progression. Once you've reached a certain point in the story, then the upgrade becomes available. The problem is, they might as well have done away with the minerals and just given me the upgrade. Every single time they finally let me upgrade my weapons, I had more than enough minerals stored to purchase them and have plenty of minerals still left over. It just feels silly, and it takes out any real strategy or personal customization. And then upgrading your health and stamina is locked behind optional collectibles. To unlock each tier of health upgrade, you need to find a certain amount of these punnies. Haven't found enough punnies? Too bad, you're not upgrading your health. Stamina, on the other hand, is tied to finding these plants, and it operates on the exact same system. I really dislike this. I get what they were trying to do in promoting exploration, but it just feels cumbersome and annoying to me. What would have been wrong with simply letting the upgrade system be reliant on how many minerals you have, rather than gatekeeping it behind progression and secret collectibles? There are also these little relics you can find, which are then shown off in the captain's room of the Protostar, which is a fun bit of fan service. In-game, the visuals usually look pretty good. All of the environments are nice, varied, and really don't give off that budget feel. There are occasions where the budget is felt. But I feel like it mostly punches above its weight.
Receiving incoming transmission.
Over the course of preparing for this review and playing Star Trek Prodigy Supernova, I went from being a complete Star Trek virgin to a pretty big fan of Prodigy. The quality of the show and the game feel pretty tightly linked. Neither of them will knock your socks off, but they're fun for what they are. Supernova doesn't always get it right, but the combat feels satisfying for the most part, and the puzzles are pulled off so well that they even had me enjoying it. I'm not sure if I'd put it at the top of the pile for games based on cartoons in 2022. It's been a ridiculously stacked year, but I know that it'll be a genuine contender come December 31. Even if you're not a fan of Star Trek, give this game a chance. I'd be surprised if you walk away completely disappointed. Next time, I'll be back to diving into the archives again to look at Avatar: The Last Airbender. This review initially seemed like it would be timed to drop right before Avatar: Quest for Balance came out, which was leaked and supposedly releasing on November 8. But that game still hasn't been announced, so I'm not sure what's happening anymore. Either way, it'll be super interesting to go back to the first ever Avatar game. Avatar is obviously a show that lends itself perfectly to video games, and with a home console version accompanied by a GBA and DS version 2, there's going to be some really unique takes on the franchise. To make sure you don't miss that video or any of my upcoming reviews, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the channel, jump over to Twitter and give me a follow.